Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast. I'm Julian Barthold.
I'm Madeline Johnson.
My name is Emilio Tostado.
And this is a podcast where the three of us, who all work together at a Midtown Manhattan music school, have decided to start, recording what we would regularly do, which is talk about movies after all our work is done, well into the night, often in lieu of a good night's sleep.
Definitely. In my case, absolutely.
So this episode you're about to hear is one that we would categorize as, well, technically under name, it would be a two-shot. For this particular episode, we happen to discuss three movies.
Yeah, we decided also because after recording it, three's
a lot.
There's
a lot of movies to talk about.
And we might find ways to talk about three movies in the future, but we're going to focus primarily on just two
and
going
really,
forward.
We started on two with this. I think we had an initial conceit of two movies, and then I was like, I really want to talk about this third movie. I think it fits into this theme.
So,
which it did.
It's become three.
Podcast. So here we are again. And today what we're going to talk about is a trio of movies from the 90s, all neo-noir thrillers with some black comedy thrown in. Those three movies are, in chronological order, Shallow Grave, Fargo, and A Simple Plan. We thought that they would make a great sort of trio of movies to discuss, to consider like what they have in common, why do we appreciate them, and all that stems from that. So we're going to start with Fargo, because that is probably, of this bunch, the most widely known of the three, and certainly a very widely appreciated movie too. Rather than giving any more preface, I'll start with this synopsis I wrote of the film. And of course, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a very big spoiler alert.
I think we'll be getting into spoilers.
Yeah. All three of these movies are really spoiler alert.
For sure.
You have been forewarned. Okay. Minneapolis car salesman Jerry Lundegaard hires two men, Carl Showalter and Geir Grimsrud, to kidnap his wife, Jean, and collect the ransom money. This salesman, Jerry, has fallen on kind of non-specific hard times financially and is looking, and that's why he's concocting this whole scheme. After an unsuccessful attempt on Jerry's part to call it off, after realizing he may not have to do it, the kidnapping proceeds, and Carl and Geir bring Jean Lundegaard, his wife, to Fargo, North Dakota, or they attempt to, and along the way, they are stopped by the police in a traffic stop, which goes horribly wrong. This is in Brainerd, Minnesota, and results in three people uninvolved in this whole case being murdered, specifically by Geir Grimsrud. This triple homicide falls into the lap of pregnant local police officer Marge Gunderson, who begins to trace Carl and Geir's whereabouts from a number of rather easily found clues. Jerry Lundegaard and his father-in-law and boss, Wayne Gustafson, begin arranging a drop-off of the ransom money as Marge brings her investigation to Minneapolis, and Carl travels there as well. While in Minneapolis, Marge has a dinner with a high school classmate, Mike Yanagita, who attempts to proposition her before confessing he is hopelessly lonely. Carl and Jerry arrange a drop-off of the ransom money, but Wayne Gustafson unsuccessfully takes the meeting into his own hands and is killed by Carl, who is in turn wounded, but leaves with the money and manages to hide his portion of it. Clues continue to pile up, which bring the police closer to catching all the suspects. Marge makes a stop at Jerry's job before leaving Minneapolis in one last attempt to find evidence from him, but Jerry flees the interview in a panic. Carl returns to Fargo to find Jean Lundegaard dead, let me restart that. Carl returns to Fargo to find that Geir has killed Jean Lundegaard and attempts to split the ransom money in two vehicles with Geir before Geir decides to kill Carl. Upon returning to North Dakota, Marge happens upon the house where Geir and Carl stayed, tipped off by the car in the driveway, which she has been following this whole time, and finds Geir disposing of Carl's body via a wood chipper. Marge shoots Geir when he attempts to flee before arresting him. Jerry Lundegaard is caught by the police, and Marge goes home to her husband, Norm, who makes paintings of mallards for some reason, and whose painting of a mallard has just been selected for a cheap postage stamp. Not the one he wanted, but selected nonetheless. And that's where the movie ends. One of the first things I'd like to discuss is that from the standpoint of police investigation, this, for Marge Gunderson and for anyone taking on the job, is a pretty easy case. And it really seems like part of the atmosphere of the movie comes from the fact that Marge Gunderson is able to take this all kind of in stride. Like she's pretty unfazed by this whole ordeal, and really it's kind of all in a day's work for her. So that's one of the things that makes room in the story for a lot of absurdity. One of the best examples of that absurdity is with the little appearance of Mike Yanagita, Marge's high school friend, who has suddenly reached out to her after seeing her in the news following this case. And, this awkward encounter just kind of evolves into Mike Yanagita not so subtly hinting that he is attracted to Marge, who politely
rebuffs him.
Yes. Before he outright admits that he's attracted to her and breaks down crying, saying that he's so lonely.
I mean, it's certainly bold to hit on a woman who is 7 months pregnant.
Exactly.
I think so too.
Yes.
Decades.
They
even talk about her husband. I think he says something like, "Oh, you married Norm." I forget the nickname that he has, but like he knows that she's married.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he knows. And he claims to have been married and lost his wife to leukemia. But we find out a little bit later on that that was never the case. It was that he was just telling a completely fabricated story there.
Gain some sympathy points.
Yeah, exactly, to gain some sympathy. And I wanted to single out this portion of the movie because I feel like this, above all else, maybe stands out as the part of the movie that has nothing to do with almost anything else in the movie. And yet I think it works. I think it's the perfect example of absurdity. And, well, I don't know if I completely understand all the reasons why it's in the film, but that's part of why I thought it would be good to talk about.
Sure. It has this feeling of being kind of a non sequitur, when in many respects, it's sort of the catalyst for Marge to realize that behind his smile, behind his courteousness, he's actually lying about it. And that, I don't know if that's something that she totally considered before that moment, before she has the phone call with their mutual friend and realizes that it was all a ruse. And that it's that moment that pushes her to go back to Jerry Lundegaard and be like, so tell me about the lot count.
Yeah, maybe what have I missed?
And it's funny, that to me brings up a big point of the movie that I just find really fascinating, is the encounters of nicety. I think this movie really interrogates the idea of niceness in such an interesting way. And the Mike Yanagita incident is one of the big ones that seems to, on its surface, be somebody wearing their heart on their sleeve, but is actually trying to get something over on somebody else.
That there's a conniving edge to it. I mean, for a movie that is so rife with examples of cutting through this facade of nicety, I actually didn't think about that for that scene.
One thing that I read that Roger Deakins, the cinematographer, says is, I think the quote was, "Polite cultures are the most repressed and therefore the most violent."
Right. Yeah, and it certainly seems to play itself out with Jerry.
Yeah.
Right? Jerry is repressed in a lot of different ways. It's like he's trapped by his niceness. There's that really great scene at the very beginning where Wade Gustafson comes for dinner and he's trying to still sell him on the plot, buying the plot of land as an investment. And he says, this would be really good for Gene and Scotty and me. And Wade very pointedly says, Scotty and Gene are never going to have to worry. And so he always kind of feels cut out. And that niceness has this way of emasculating him from the world and from a whole bunch of other situations. And so the niceness has to come through. He's not able to talk to his wife about whatever crazy situation he needs money for. He's not able to bring it up to his father-in-law. He's not able to sell a True Coat to these people without setting it up in some nice way that he feels he can snake out of.
He's extremely nervous whenever he's in conflict. I mean, he has a nervous energy all the time, perhaps because he's almost always in conflict in this movie. But whenever, like, for example, you alluded to the scene with him and Marge when she goes back to the dealership, and he keeps, like, he's getting tenser and tenser, and he's like, "Oh, I'm cooperating. I'm cooperating.
I'm working with you.
Yeah.
I'm working with you."
Because at that point, he can't think of anything else to do other than attempt to escape.
Sure.
And then at the very end, when different police officers find him in a motel and they get the manager to open the door, and he's again trying to flee out the window.
I think that has to be an all-time scene of patheticness.
So sad.
Committed
he's
to
in
film.
his underwear.
Yeah. And a great example of the schadenfreude that the Coen brothers so effectively create in Fargo. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not the only one like it in the movie. In fact, I think most of the characters are unsympathetic to the point that it's very easy to create schadenfreude. I think that Marge and some of the people around her are obviously the more sympathetic characters. There's humor with them too, just as well, but from kind of a different place.
Well, to go back to your point about absurdity, because I do think that that's a good way to describe a lot of what happens in the movie, even if it plays out in a very natural way. There's this deep polarity that is happening in the movie that, and one side you have, a triple homicide on the highway, and then literally 2 minutes later, it's this sort of domestic story of Marge and her husband.
Yeah.
These two things are happening in the same world at the same time. And that is the absurdity of it, is that like life can actually sustain these two, one very banal and one super violent.
And they have such a wonderfully functional relationship.
Yeah.
They are definitely like couple goals, because I love that scene of her being called into work and him like, "Oh, I'll make you some eggs." And she's like, "No, you don't have to do that." And he's like, "I want to," essentially.
Yeah, and Norm Gunderson is played by the great John Carroll Lynch, who is maybe not, the first name you would think of in terms of actors or filmmakers in general, but for people with a keen eye, there's a lot of gems that he has either acted in or even directed.
Zodiac,
yes.
That's the big one for me.
And he directed a film with Harry Dean Stanton called Lucky, which was kind of the final, I think, Harry Dean Stanton
that's
film.
Harry Dean Stanton's last movie. It's very good. Have you seen that?
No,
it's
never.
very touching. Yeah.
That's good.
I'll
check it out.
Yeah, it will make you cry. Just
Oh,
because
God.
Harry
Okay,
Dean
it's really
just because
that
it is his last film. And that's a big theme of the movie.
Yeah.
Wow. Is his own
his character is very old.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, he was pretty old in the 80s.
Yeah.
So
he just always looked kind of old.
Yeah. There's some actors that are like that. That just like, are they? You look at their IMDb and you're like, they were 42 when they made that movie, and you're like, I could have sworn they were in their 60s. But
in music, that's Tom Waits, because I don't think he was ever really young. But
certainly never sounded young.
Yes.
Yeah.
But going back to Fargo, so we've cut through this facade of niceness, and now we see the violent underbelly in the film. And I think a great point to talk about in regards to that is specifically the character of Geir Grimsrud, who I think, he doesn't have a lot of screen time, but he has a very consequential effect on the turnout of the movie.
And not only does he not have much screen time, he has almost no lines, which is kind of like a running theme between him and Carl Steve Buscemi's character.
Yeah, and Geir Grimsrud is played by Peter Stormare, another great character actor, known probably a little more prominent, or maybe not more prominently, maybe equally from The Big Lebowski, released 2 years later.
He was one of the nihilists.
He was one of the nihilists, and that's actually, that's very relevant to what I was going to say, because I think that even in Fargo, his character is kind of a nihilist.
Totally.
And I think more than a nihilist, maybe like a psychopath too, because I think that he draws the highest body count of all the characters in the movie, and there are a lot of people killed in this movie, but he is solely responsible for the triple homicide that occurs on the road.
And seems to be completely unaffected by the blood fountain spewing out of the state trooper's head.
Yeah.
I mean, Steve Buscemi's character, Carl, is horrified by this. He's getting covered in blood.
Yeah, so he's this really cold-blooded character, and he, as we said, speaks almost no lines, and yet he does all of these horrid things. Near the end of the movie, he is responsible for killing Jean Lundegaard, and it's really just that, she started screaming and he got tired of it. That's the only reason that he has.
One of the things I will say too about this movie that hit me this time watching it, I was profoundly saddened by all the scenes with the son.
Yeah.
The son is surprisingly good in this movie, playing kind of a snotty kid. But when he has to be the audience proxy and the one with the conscience who's like, this is really weird, we should be calling the cops, it's kind of heartbreaking. And I think at the end of the movie, this kid now has to live with the fact that he knows his dad orchestrated this whole thing. His mom is dead because of it.
His grandfather's
dead. And yeah, all over a little money, like what Marge says.
Exactly. That quote really stuck out to me for the obvious reason. And she says, like, and for what? A little bit of money. And that's really the theme of all three of these movies.
Yeah, that's true.
But I also really love, the Coens are just masters of this, like, sprinkling and those little comedic moments, because as heart-wrenching as the scene with the kid is when he's speaking to Jerry and he's like, we should call the cops, I'm so worried about mom. He also has an accordion on his bed and the back of his bedroom door has a poster of the Accordion King. Yeah. I just love that little detail, because up until then you've seen this kid of like, I want to try out for hockey, and mom's like, you're a C student. But it loves the accordion.
Yeah. And that feels a little bit like, I don't know to the extent to which that's a regional detail, but it is worth noting that this movie, the setting of this movie, is uniquely personal to the Coen brothers, having grown up in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. So they are treading on very, very familiar ground, maybe the most familiar ground of any movie that they had made up until that point.
Speaking of regional specifics, the accents in this movie are so fun. I love them.
I think even before I saw this movie as a teenager, people, if I would talk about Fargo, it would be the like, oh yeah,
you betcha, yeah,
exactly, that had to accompany. It was that and the wood chipper.
Those
are like the two big things that I feel like culturally sort of come from this movie. But yes, the accents are their own character.
Off of the wood chipper point, my intro to this movie, so more broadly, my parents are very big fans of the Coen brothers and strongly encouraged the interest that I have now developed in them. And I bring this up because my parents had told me what I consider to be kind of a good spoiler before actually seeing the movie, which is, I think when we would talk about it before I'd seen it, they just said, Steve Buscemi ends up in a wood chipper in that movie. And so during the scene when that finally happens, when Marge Gunderson exits her car and you hear this hum, this non-specific hum in the air, then I think the first time I watched this movie, which was with my parents, I think it was my mom who said, you know what that hum is?
Setting it up.
Which leads to, I think, one of the best comedic moments of the movie when
she points to her head.
She points to her head, and she's struggling to tell him he's under arrest over the sound of the wood
She's
chipper.
yelling at him and he can't hear her.
Yeah. Which I think is just, it may not be like a very difficult part to orchestrate in terms of sound and film, but I think it's one of my favorite uses of sound in film that I've seen ever.
Yeah.
I was also, though, thinking about when Marge interviews the earlier call girls. And there's a moment there that is repeated later in the movie where she's asking them to describe the guys. And the woman that was paired with Carl is like, talks about the like funny looking little guy. And later you get this when there's like
the bartender that calls in later,
and he's like, he's just funny looking. And I hear this, I watch this movie and I'm like, why everyone in this town is so mean to Steve Buscemi? And I understand the character is a bad guy, and he's a little funny looking, but in like a charming way.
It's not like they are that good looking themselves. Like, I don't know what is particularly weird about
none of these people are like all that at least not styled to be like conventionally attractive.
No, that's true.
So what's so funny looking about Steve Buscemi as opposed to everyone else in this movie?
That actually is another point I wanted to bring up about the movie, which I think is a strength of it, is that the Coens are great at casting people who are not conventionally good looking in their movies. And I think that adds reality to it.
Did either of you get a chance to watch the Charlie Rose interview with the Coens and Frances McDormand?
No,
I don't think
it's
so.
on the DVD. One of the things that they dig into is one, that the Coens often write for specific people.
Mm-hmm.
And two, that they are so good at casting. They're so intentional about their casting.
I've also read too that they are so intentional in their scripts. Like if somebody says something like, "Where is the pancake house?" they will stop everything and be like, "What's written there? It's pancakes with a plural." Or they are supposed to say something and stammer over it or stutter over it, and there's 4 ums, but there are 5 ums written in this script.
Yeah, that's another thing that they get into a little bit in this interview that Frances McDormand talks about. And then Charlie Rose brings up Nick Cage having spoken about this after working with them on Raising Arizona.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we love Nick. He's a fantastic actor. He's got a lot of ideas, but you really need to like taper him down for what we're going for.
Sure.
Like we write this script and this dialogue very intentionally, and we want the actors to have fun with it. We want the actors to bring their characters to life.
Yeah, and I remember hearing in Mark Maron's conversation with Tim Blake Nelson that Tim Blake Nelson said he was, I think, grateful for how much they were sticklers for their own scripts, because I think he said it makes it a little easier to explore as an actor in a way.
I also think it's just kind of cool, like as an actor, to be working with people who have that much creative control. And
you have a very clear vision of what they want.
I think on the level of format too, it's worth noting that this movie has a very unconventionally organized screenplay where it's kind of, set out at the beginning. It really makes it out as though Jerry Lundegaard is going to be the main character and he's going to become this kind of anti-hero, which happens pretty quickly. But then after the first act of the movie, which Marge Gunderson is not in at all, suddenly she appears in Act 2 and she's the protagonist.
Yeah, I checked and it's 33 minutes in.
33 minutes
is when Marge appears for the first time.
Yeah. Which I think is a very bold move from a screenwriting standpoint. It's a strength I think they have across many other movies. There's just kind of this sense that they know they're doing it, quote unquote wrong, and they really don't care.
Yeah. I don't know. Were there any other points you wanted to bring up?
Yes, there were a few more. So Fargo is famously a movie that people often describe as a film where the setting is one of the characters, where this deeply snowy Minnesota and North Dakota setting, it's a character in and of itself. It governs a lot of the events of the film and their outcomes. But I think second only to the snow, the aspect of the world building that really struck me was the abundance of cars in Fargo, that a lot of the plot revolves specifically around cars. And of course, Jerry Lundegaard is an employee at a car dealership.
But I kind of love that that's his lot in life. I feel like it's semi-telling of the way that he's two-faced, that even in this world where everybody has to be so nice to one another, there are also snakes. There have to be car salesmen.
But even beyond the dealer, him working there's just so much that has to do with it. That traffic stop that goes horribly wrong with Carl and Geyer, it all happens because Carl forgot to put stickers on the car, and that's why they are stopped by the cops, or cop singular. And then that happens. The initial bargain that is made in the movie is that Jerry Lundegaard is bringing the Sierra that they end up driving throughout the movie, Carl and Geyer. He's bringing that to them basically as kind of almost a down payment. And so that occurs, and a lot of the investigation that Marge undertakes has to do with following that car. And eventually when she finds Geyer disposing of Carl's body in the wood chipper, it's because of the car.
Sure.
I noticed that, as far as motifs, there are cars in the movie, and then there's a lot having to do with food as well. And I don't know if that's explained, but we just see characters eating food a lot.
I love it. I love how much junk food is in this movie.
Yeah, and I assume on some level that, some of that is meant to, to make Marge realistic because she is pregnant. But then some of that food, I mean, you think like, this is not good food for you to eat at any point.
Yeah, the buffet looks so unappetizing, and it's been a long time since I've been to a buffet like that, but I certainly have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're not a couple that's downing like protein shakes. That's not their vibe. And then also, I think it dovetails nicely with your point about casting. Mm-hmm. You're not looking for people and actors who look like matinee idols. You're looking for people that look like they're ready to go back for a third plate at the buffet.
Yeah.
One other, it's not as much of a motif as cars or food in the movie, but I was interested in in Norm Gunderson's obsession with ducks. I don't know if there's a reason
Mallards.
for it. Mallards, specifically.
Get it right. Yeah,
Thank you for catching me on that. I don't know if there's a reason for it. I thought maybe it's just another sort of absurd detail of the movie, but I thought that was interesting. And actually, to draw a connection, which this is not the only point I'm going to make on this too, that, for fans of The Sopranos, ducks, of course, have a certain meaning. You don't have to dig deep into The Sopranos. It's in the pilot episode where, these ducks are... they are floating around in Tony Soprano's pool, and he leaves and he feels like that's a symbol for his loss of purpose in life. But if you connect it to The Sopranos, the ducks almost seem kind of like a symbol of the groundedness of the Gunderson family. Mm-hmm. And The Sopranos did not yet exist at the time of Fargo, but I just thought that was an interesting connection to make. Do either of you have any further thoughts on the ducks?
Not the ducks specifically.
I love that question. Do you have any further thoughts on the ducks?
Mallards. Excuse me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't.
Not the ducks specifically.
I love that you brought it up.
But
Please take it away, Madeline.
I want a follow-up on the competition between like the stamp competition. He has these rivals. Mm-hmm. And Norm has these like painting rivals that I want to know more about. I want like a short film about the stamp paint competition.
Because he says something, he's like, oh, that guy's so good. Or like, oh, he's just so much better.
Because Norm gets on the 3-cent stamp.
Yeah.
And then the rivals get on whatever, 26-cent stamp.
Yeah.
But she's like, oh no, people need the little stamps. I love that.
Yeah, that point at the end of the film is really sweet. It somehow encapsulates, I think, the general vibe of the movie, that we've ping-ponged back and forth between life that feels very mundane and then this very extreme scenario of crime.
Yeah.
And that it seems to all come together. And I don't quite know how they pulled it off. It really feels like a magic trick. The way a lot of this movie seems to just flow and leave you almost skipping out of whatever place you've seen the film.
Yeah.
And in a less healthy relationship, I think that Marge's character could have viewed this stamp competition as very trivial. She could look at this as just a hobby rather than a career, which it clearly is for him. But they're just like have such this such strong relationship that she is just so supportive of him and he of her, and that's why I just really love them.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that it's also interesting to consider in the context of the film noir genre, or neo-noir more accurately, because it's a trope in films noir that the ending, I had to say it that way, that the ending kind of brings the main characters back to where they began in some way. It's not that's not true of every film of this sort, but you see it in many examples. Either that they end where they began, or maybe some other irreversible outcome occurs. But I think that this is one of the greatest endings I've seen to a film in that genre, where Marge and Norm really do kind of end where they began, in the sense that it was just another day in the life for them. And that they can actually very sincerely look forward to a positive future. And the last line of the entire film is 2 more months, referring to Marge's unborn baby. It might be the most authentically optimistic ending of a neo-noir that I can even think of. There are some other, close runners up, but Fargo really stands alone in certain ways.
I think it also feels a lot like a sitcom.
Yeah.
You're talking about all of a sudden everything sort of returning to stasis, which also I think adds a little bit to the feeling of absurdity. You're like, what did I just see?
It's in some ways a satire of American film too. The idea that it can all just be wrapped up in this kind of neat bundle at the end, when in fact, for an astute viewer will notice that there are all these loose ends that remain untied. And that, from a storytelling angle is probably more authentic. Would these loose ends be tied up? Probably not. But yet from, filmically, this, scene with Marge and Norm in bed is probably the neatest way they can bundle the movie up. And it's very sweet and sincere to watch in spite of the context that it exists within. But it also, part of why it's sweet and sincere is that it's not overplayed. It really feels very ordinary for them.
I'm going to ask really quick because I don't know if this is something we want to carry over from one of these conversations to another.
Yeah.
But on a scale of 1 to 10, guys, Fargo, where do we put it?
I'm going to go there. I really would give it a 10.
Yeah, I mean, this is a 5-star movie for me. I'd put it up there for sure.
And I think the last major point that I wanted to bring up about the movie before we transition is about its critical status, is that of the 3 movies that we're discussing tonight, I mean, it was definitely the most critically lauded. It won 2 Oscars. And when you think about its influence, I mean, I don't know if you really can think of many other things that look like it, but it is a movie that really stays with the film world in a lot of ways. One of the best examples of influence I can actually think of, to pick up on an earlier thread, is in The Sopranos, in one of its iconic episodes, Pine Barrens, which many people will say is the best episode of The Sopranos, period, which takes place mostly in the snow and has a lot of other darkly comedic and absurd elements to it.
And also directed by Steve Buscemi.
Yes, and that probably, that draws it draws a very clear connection to Fargo. And then, in the Coen brothers' filmography, I think this was only their second neo-noir after Blood Simple, which had been 12 years before, but you see them pick it up more with The Big Lebowski. I haven't seen it, but I've heard that The Man Who Wasn't There falls into this category. No Country for Old Men, Burn After Reading, and Hail Caesar, even though that probably has more to do with Barton Fink than with Fargo, in my understanding of it. So it seems it was influential to the film world, it was influential to television, and it was influential even to the Coen brothers in their own filmography.
And when you're alluding to the success of this film, I think it's at this point their most financially successful film.
Yeah.
I think one of the questions Charlie Rose has for them in that interview is, are you ever going to make a movie that makes money? If you were going to make a movie that made a bunch of money, what would you make? It was such a weird question.
Yeah.
And they're like, I mean, we want to make money so we can keep making movies.
Yeah. Did you have something to say, Emilio?
No, I was just going to semi-segue that, which is you were talking about the influence that the Coen brothers had on filmmaking, and the influence that this movie had for them. I figured this would be as good as any time to start talking about A Simple Plan.
Yes.
Cool. A Simple Plan. It takes place in a rural small town in Minnesota.
Still in Minnesota here.
Yes,
Still
I
very
know.
snowy.
Yeah, the comparisons are plenty here. So Bill Paxton plays Hank Mitchell. He's a bookkeeper at a local feed mill, and his wife is a librarian named Sarah. She's played by Bridget Fonda. She is weeks away from giving birth
Another
to their first child.
Pregnant woman.
Yeah, wow. So life is simple but very steady for them. They don't have a lot, but they seemingly also don't need a whole lot to be happy. And that all changes on a fateful New Year's Eve when Hank accompanies his older brother, Jacob, played by Billy Bob Thornton, and his hard-drinking buddy, Lou, who's played by Brent Briscoe, into the woods. And they're in search of Jacob's dog, who's scampered off after the 3 men had to swerve in their truck to avoid a fox in the middle of the road. Instead of finding their dog, at least right away, that is, they find a crashed single-engine plane with a dead pilot inside and a duffel bag full of cash to the tune of $4.4 million. It's more money than these 3 men have ever seen, and enticed by the possibilities this money can provide them, they make a pact between them that Hank take the money and sit on it until spring. If no one comes looking for the money, they're going to divide it up 3 ways and they're going to split town. But as soon as that night, tensions begin to mount between the 3 men. Lou wants his cut of the money right away. Jacob insists that he wants to stay in town and buy back their father's abandoned farm home. And Hank struggles to maintain the control of this situation, as well as maintaining control in his clean conscience, with every new complication that seems to rise. And by the end of the movie, the money and the cover-up of all of it has set up this chain reaction of deception and violence that's resulted in a lot of painful loss, not just of life, but really in a way of life, right? Mm-hmm. A way of life that was once marked by virtue and good nature, and that's unlikely to ever return or be salvaged. A Simple Plan was released in late 1998 for award season.
The latest of our 3 movies.
That's true, yes. It was critically appreciated at the time, and it earned Billy Bob Thornton his 3rd Oscar nomination in 3 years, this time for his supporting actor role. At the time of its release, A Simple Plan earned many comparisons to Fargo, released just a few years earlier. And on its face, it makes a lot of sense, right? These are 2 crime thrillers that take place in snowy Midwest, featuring rather unremarkable people, dangerously out of their depth, whose bad decisions just pile up along with the body count. And furthermore, A Simple Plan's director, Sam Raimi, and the Coens, they had a long-standing friendship and a working relationship. Their careers often dovetailed, right? The Coens wrote Sam Raimi's second feature film, 1985's Crime Wave. Sam Raimi co-wrote the Coens' 1994 film, The Hudsucker Proxy. And for a while there, the Coens and Sam Raimi, they kind of separately had very similar types of careers, putting their personal quirky spins on genre films. But the two admittedly learned a lot from one another, and you can see notable influences of Sam Raimi in the Coens' first 2 pictures, Blood Simple and Raising Arizona. But the Coens, I think, kind of branched out, right? They evolved rather notably throughout the 1990s. But Sam Raimi, I don't think really had a whole lot of other tricks up his sleeve. I think he was kind of known as more the kind of guy who could bring this cartoonish, feverish energy to fantastic stories. And that seemed to kind of set them apart. Until this movie, though. I think A Simple Plan is where you really see Raimi aping the Coens for the first time. It has a more subdued tone. There's a lot more room for acting and story to develop and shine. There's a distinct lack of special effects in this movie. And if you think that the film looks similar, you'd be right. The Coens reportedly consulted with Sam Raimi, or Sam Raimi consulted with them heavily about how to film snow and give it this drabness that was going to sort of color the whole film. While Fargo seems to have a lot of fun with the concept of niceness, the characters in A Simple Plan deal a lot more directly with the ideas of good and evil. And they're always asking themselves about the morality of their actions, like always kind of confronting this issue of a line being crossed when greed enters the picture or enters their thoughts, right? There are a lot of things that connect, I think, these 2 movies. But I think there are also a lot of things that separate Simple Plan from Fargo from their execution. And I think 25 years later, A Simple Plan is pretty well cemented itself, I think, as a solid late 90s thriller. I think that's kind of where it sits. You know, I think it's still somewhat in the shadow of Fargo, but I think on its own merits, it's still a very engaging and thought-provoking movie.
Definitely.
I guess I would ask you, Julian, really quick. You were the one who, of the 3 of us, who had not seen this movie until most recently.
Yeah.
What were your initial thoughts about it?
I definitely liked it. And I thought that apart from surface level connections, I mean, it didn't actually remind me that much of Fargo. I thought it was tonally a pretty different movie with, I think, a more bleak outlook. I found it interesting. I read a little bit about it. I mean, it's just the Wikipedia page, but there's a lot of interesting details there. I found it quite interesting that this movie, unlike Fargo, was in development hell for years before it was made. And that Sam Raimi, I think, was maybe the 5th director who came onto it.
Totally.
And there was
John Borman.
But John Borman had been on.
Mike Nichols.
Mike Nichols was the first one.
Yeah.
And then
Ben Stiller, Mike Nicolas Cage. There are a lot of names attached to this.
Yeah. And I think that it had entered development around maybe 1992 or 3, before Fargo, in fact, way before, but it had gone through this cascade of changes in production companies and directors that eventually led it to John Boorman, who was the predecessor to Sam Raimi, but who dropped out last minute due to scheduling conflicts. And then the film fell in Sam Raimi's lap. And I read that he was drawn to it because it was a change from his prior films. That it was something more character focused and a little bit less, I think, special effects driven. And I mean, apart from a few moments early on in the movie, I didn't really think that much about him being the director of this. I mean, I felt in a certain way like it doesn't show the typical markers of his directorial personality.
There are a couple of moments that feel very Raimi to me.
Yes.
And a couple of them are early on, but one that is later that sticks out to me is when Hank, Jacob, and Lou, their friend, are at Lou's home, and Hank's wife has kind of concocted this scheme to get Lou to confess to a murder that's happened earlier on that's connected with them, and have Hank tape it.
Yes.
To blackmail him. And essentially, after some things go down, Lou's wife comes down, and after a bit of a tussle, Lou gets shot. The wife gets shot. And the blowback.
I thought this is what you were going to say.
Absolutely.
I thought this whole setup was going to be about how she blows back into the kitchen sink.
Blowback into the kitchen is, I think, the most Raimi moment of this whole film.
Yeah.
Yeah. I might second that with early in the movie, in the scene when they come upon the plane for the first time. The moments when the plane's kind of rocking around, when Bill Paxton, Hank, is inside it, and you realize that the pilot sitting in the pilot's seat is moving because a crow is feasting upon his dead body. That felt like a very Raimi moment to me.
To build off of that, one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting I wanted to ask you guys about was, I know that in Fargo, the snow and the kind of oppressiveness of the snow is a character, but I feel like in this movie there's this really strange aspect of nature, and not just environmental nature, but I think through its use of environmental nature, we are asked or invited to also consider nature of a human kind. And so the movie has those crows, right? The crows are kind of there waiting for something to die. But also, interestingly enough, the whole thing that sets off this movie is a fox that goes into a hen house and is what gets in the way of this truck. And then that same fox is actually what sends Dwight Stevenson is his name, but the character on the snowmobile, that becomes sort of the first, oh God, this is getting more complicated situation.
Yeah.
After that guy on the snowmobile is killed and they have to make it look like an accident, there is this trust placed in the fact that there's a storm coming that's going to cover their tracks and that it's going to sort of erase the evidence of what just happened. They reference
this a few times, later as well.
Yeah. I feel like there are some subtle suggestions that, in addition to the nature that we're seeing have its role in this film, that we're also sort of invited to ask about human nature, that there is this order that we sort of create for ourselves, but then when something gets introduced, how stable is this order that we've really made for ourselves? And particularly with Hank and his wife, is how quickly they go from being or thinking that taking money is bad to, wait a minute, no, taking money can actually be incredible, and we need to do all these things to protect this new vision we've created for ourselves because of it.
Yeah, when he first comes home after finding the money, he doesn't tell her immediately. He asks her, if you were to find $4 million in the woods, what would you do? And she's like, I don't know. You want me to say I wouldn't take it? And then as soon as he starts dumping the money out, her expression changes entirely. And after everything's happened, by the end of the film, essentially, after everything has happened, so many people have died died at this point, including his brother, Jacob. He finds out that he can't actually spend the money because it's already been inventoried partially by the FBI.
Enough that he doesn't even want to deal with it.
Yeah, spending any amount of it would set off alarm bells for the FBI. So he has to just burn it. And she is bawling and like begging him to stop. And I think that that's a really interesting parallel from like the beginning to the end of the film.
I think, in fact, going off of that point, that literally just the moment when at first Sarah, Bridget Fonda's character, is describing in theory why it's wrong to steal money, the moment when Hank just pours the money out on the counter and you see her expression change immediately is so indicative of that. I think it's a very well acted moment, and in a lot of ways, the heart and soul of the movie is in that moment.
And can we talk about Bridget Fonda for a second?
Yes,
so
please.
You guys know Danny Elfman did the score for this.
Yes, which is a great score.
It's a fantastic score. You know, this is where they met. They're married.
Yeah.
And I think remain married to this day. They met on this movie, Danny Elfman and Bridget Fonda.
Very cool. I did not know that.
And this is her second Raimi. Yeah. She has a brief part in Army of Darkness.
Cool. It's been a long time since I've seen Army of Darkness. I remember thinking it was fine.
I didn't love Army of Darkness personally, but I know people who love it.
Yeah.
Didn't quite click for me personally.
No, same here.
But I was trying to think of what other actors Raimi's worked with before from this movie. I don't know that he's worked with anyone else.
But Bill Paxton and Billy Bob Thornton had worked together in One False Move, which I still have yet to see.
Yeah, which is a very good movie. I would recommend it, although I say that with the caveat that know that in the first 10 minutes, there is some very graphic violence. You bring up Billy Bob Thornton and Bill Paxton, and I think that the heart of the movie is in their relationships and also their performances. I think Hank Mitchell is a really great character, I think, for somebody like Bill Paxton, because he has a way of wearing desperation and sadness and the weight of his thoughts on his face and in his voice, I think about as well as any actor, because that Hank Mitchell character, he's like a hometown kid who got stuck, I think, in this pretty simple life because it was easy enough and because he had a job that paid just enough. And also that, he stays around in this town because he feels like he has to look after this brother. I think Billy Bob Thornton just does an amazing job with this role as well, because his character has to kind of drop these hints here and there that he is smarter and feels more than I think he lets on.
He has this intense empathy and feels guilt for what they've done in a way that you don't really see Hank express. The way that you see Hank's mind work is that he's just sort of trying to figure out how they're going to get out of it. Whereas you don't really see him too beat up about the people that he's killed, the people he's affected by this. Whereas Jacob, just by the end of it, he's like, I can't live with this. I cannot do this. I've had enough.
Yeah. He seems like something happened to him. Like there's some sort of traumatic incident or something going on, because he's holding on so tightly to this idea of his dad and the home that they lost or was abandoned because of some failing of his father's. And there's some sort of a trauma that he's taken on that little by little through the movie, he opens Hank up to. So that by the end of the movie, and I think it's very telling that the movie ends with Hank looking at their home. And that it's almost this is like weird transference of trauma that that Jacob was feeling something and was living through something that this whole ordeal just broke him. And that Hank had the ability, like you say, to almost intellectualize and problem solve his way out of feeling. And he's left with the inability to not feel all of the weight of everything that's going on at the very end.
Yeah.
Generally, I I mean, I don't think you see him that much anymore, but I like Billy Bob Thornton on screen quite a lot too.
He was on a real heater too at the time this movie came out.
Yeah.
Because he had done Sling Blade.
Yeah.
He was just in Armageddon that summer.
Right.
Yeah.
He was about to date and marry Angelina Jolie. And that was its own thing too.
On a level of personal interest, I mean, I happen to be a very big fan of the singer Warren Zevon, and Billy Bob Thornton was personal friends with Warren Zevon, and they bonded over their shared experience of OCD, which I think is very interesting. And I love how Billy Bob Thornton is open about his experience with OCD, as I am someone who has it as well. He's very open about it publicly. So just, maybe not so much to do with A Simple Plan, but just a Billy Bob Thornton appreciation moment.
I was just going to say that I think I remember reading that the monologue that he has in the car where he's talking about the girl that, was paid to go out with him, I think that was improvised.
Oh, wow.
I love the little details in that. And when he tells himself it's okay because she didn't just ignore him after. She would
nice
say hi to him afterwards, and she's like, she didn't have to do that. It's a great scene, and I think Bill Paxton is a great scene partner in that one too, because you can see also in his face, and that happens throughout the movie, is he's just kind of brought more and more into his brother's world and his way of thinking that is simple, but also deeply affected by their shared past.
I mean, it really is heartbreaking to watch. I think another scene that contains a lot of the heart and soul of the movie. And the longer standing hope expressed throughout of buying back his father's farm. I think it's kind of a greater ambition than Hank's character even has. Hank is kind of responding to external stimuli, and that's why he does what he does.
Emilio, you spoke a little bit about the relationship between Jacob and Hank, and that being such a crux of this film. And as I was rewatching it this week, it occurred to me, my question that I have is how much of a factor the money plays in some of these circumstances. Like when Jacob injures the guy on the snowmobile. What's his name again?
Dwight Stevenson.
Dwight Stevenson.
So when Jacob injures Dwight Stevenson, and they're trying to figure out how to cover this up, Hank sends Jacob along and then discovers that Dwight is still alive and smothers him. At this point, my question was like, how much of this is like, oh no, we can't let him know that, like, he can't find out the money, like we can't raise suspicion. This point seemed more like he's protecting Jacob at this point. Like he knows, like the money aside, he knows that if Dwight's telling him to call the cops, like call the police. And so at this point, I think he's, finishing the job more out of familial obligation more than anything else.
I think to that point that you just made, I think what this movie does really well is it really depicts the paranoia that you start to feel when you have to stay a step ahead really well. One of the scenes that really stuck with me a lot was the day that their own daughter is born. It's not 5 seconds after Sarah is holding their daughter that she says, we have to find a way to get Lou to confess. And it's just like, this is the day that your daughter is born. This should be a moment of pure bliss, and you should find a way to sort of at least put this out of your mind for a moment, And so I think that that's one of the things that really jumps out to me is that familial obligation. It's like, yes, it very well could be, but it also literally could just be, how do we do this so that we don't have to have Jacob in custody and then maybe talk about
the money.
The money. Yeah. And I think that Jacob has shown even before that point to be rather untrustworthy and kind of have loose lips.
Jacob's on his own wavelength of trying to create the plan when they're first encountered by the sheriff.
I think so, yeah. Police chief, one of the two.
When they're first encountered by the sheriff, and Hank's like, let me handle it. And Hank's, more or less calm and cool and collected. And then like Jacob comes up and he's like, oh yeah, did you hear the plane? and later it's like, oh, well, me and Lou, we were just talking. Like, it seemed like that would be a good idea. Like, and here's our reasoning. And it's like, they're just on different wavelengths on how to go about this.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that ends up becoming the detail that brings them back later.
Down.
He's getting a haircut and he's like, hey, but maybe you can help us figure this out because you guys heard that you saw a plane. I mean, we were talking about great details and attention to detail in Fargo, and I think that's one of the things that this movie shares with it. Everything seems to be in place for something to be set up later.
Yeah.
Adding to that, in that very same scene, that haircut scene, just on the level of set detail, it's not the most obvious thing, but as the camera starts to pan around, as the sheriff walks to the side of the room, you can see there's a taxidermied fox in the window of that barbershop. And which I thought was had to be a very intentional detail, a callback to the beginning of the film, the same creature that set all of this in motion.
Yeah, and you know what also I remember in that scene is that the police chief comes in and says, oh, did he nod out on you? And he's talking about Bill Paxton. That's probably the only time in the movie that we see Bill Paxton comfortable enough to actually close his eyes and sleep.
Yeah.
Every other scene you see of him and his wife in bed, they're wide awake.
Yeah.
And the gears
scheming.
are turning and they're scheming and they're trying to get ahead of what they think might come next. And so even in that moment, he gets taken out of his ability to relax and is like, oh no, this is going to just keep going.
Yeah. And admittedly, going back to the point of, like, about the scene in the hospital after the baby is born, that admittedly is one scene that I thought didn't totally ring true to me. I thought it seemed a little bit implausible that a woman who has just given birth would have the presence of mind to talk about that.
Well, she also looks very put together and clean, having just been through labor. Her hair is like freshly brushed. She's wearing makeup. She's very shiny.
That might just be the movies.
And it is a movie after all. But, I think that is a sort of detail. I feel like that would not have happened in, say, Fargo.
I like it as a reflection of just how deep-seated the paranoia gets.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice way to reflect that. I see your point, though, for sure. I will say, of all the scenes in the movie, the one that actually felt to me to ring least true was she has a monologue later, and I felt like it was just a little too polished. It was like a little too ready to go. Yeah. And
we only go to restaurants on your birthday and we can't get dessert.
Which honestly I like. I think those are really nice details. I like all that, but there was something about how it was delivered. I also think it's the only moment where Bill Paxton goes into overacting when he's like, stop. It gets a little, it just goes a little too far for an acting performance that I think honestly is like just note perfect from beginning to end.
One detail of his performance that I noticed on rewatch, when Jacob has a stutter through most of the film, Hank also has a stutter, but it's not nearly as pronounced. And I think that's a really intentional detail by the performers and by Raimi. Whereas Hank's comes out a lot more when he's nervous. When he's being interrogated by the sheriff, then he stutters more. And I thought that was such an amazing detail that I picked up on the second time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this is a really well thought out movie that I do think there's a lot about this movie that goes really deep. And I think it is not a particularly funny movie. I think there are little moments where Billy Bob or Jacob's his simple-mindedness, I think, comes out a little bit. Like you alluded to before, I think just you don't really actually feel a lot of the comparisons to Fargo unless you're just watching it with the sound off. But in general, this movie is really going for this is one of my all-time what would you do movies where you're presented with a situation and you're just like, wow, this is pretty horrible. But would I have found myself in this very same predicament?
Just one last thing I'd like to say about A Simple Plan. If we're going to talk about the humor in the movie and great acting, Brent Briscoe.
He's so good in this.
He's really good.
For someone who is, kind of positioned as a minor character, I think he has one of the most memorable roles in the movie. I think he kind of sets the whole plot in motion in a way. He's the first one who speaks up about taking the money when they come upon that plane.
He has this desperation
that
does. Jacob has some as well. Hank doesn't quite have it to the same extent as the other two. But like Lou's desperate for money, I think. Like his truck is about to be repossessed.
To your point too, I mean, I think his line in the movie where he goes like, "It's an American dream." In a gym bag, and he just wants to walk away from it.
Yeah.
And then Bill Paxton goes, you work for the American dream, you don't steal it. And he goes like, well, then this is even better. It's that great setup too, where I think, and where it, Hank sort of sees himself as a pretty virtuous guy.
Yeah.
And the desperation in Lou's life is so great that he doesn't have the ability to look at life through those lenses.
One question. Both this and Fargo are set in Minnesota, and they have starkly different accents.
That's true.
I was very surprised, like watching this movie back, at how they almost have Southern accents in A Simple Plan.
Yeah.
Like I watched this with my boyfriend and he said, Bill Paxton sounds like your dad.
And Brent Briscoe's character too, he sounds pretty Southern.
And I have never been to Minnesota, so I was like, do people in rural Minnesota sound like this?
Yeah.
But then I rewatched Fargo and it was very stark difference for supposedly the same setting.
Interestingly, I think that both Bill Paxton and Billy Bob Thornton come from the South in real life. And so, there may have been something a little natural about that.
Sure. I mean, I feel like this movie, it sits in this really great zone where it gets under your skin. You feel like you want to talk about it with somebody later. I think the performances are really strong. I think the direction is really strong. Mm-hmm. I think tonally it's in great control from start to finish.
Yeah.
This is a 9 for me if I want to go that direction.
I might call it like an 8.5. I would say that it's a very strong movie. There are, a couple of, little inconsistencies, like we pointed out with, some of those moments that happen with Sarah, Bridget Fonda's character, where it just feels like what she does is a little too polished. Even though these all make sense, there were some minor tonal inconsistencies in it, particularly in the beginning, where there's like a couple of kind of like flashy moments.
It's that Raimi touch.
It is
Becky Ann Baker being thrown against the wall.
Yeah, it is the Raimi touch, and I think it works better in that standoff scene that you just referred to in around the middle of the movie. But in the beginning, I feel like it's a little too gimmicky for me.
I know you're not a huge Raimi fan in general.
I guess before we leave A Simple Plan, Madeline, what would you give it out of 10?
I think I'd also give it a 9. I love this movie. This was my second time watching it, and it totally holds up for me.
I like that. Yeah. And on to Londoners.
All right.
Well, yes. Edinburgh,
yeah.
Oh, is it Scotland or is it happening? Oh.
We're crossing the pond.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to lean on that. Across the pond.
We're crossing the pond now. And yes, we were going to Shallow Grave, which is set in Edinburgh, actually. But Carrie Fox's character, Juliet, has more of an English accent. So I can see why you would make the assumption of London.
Thank you. That's very generous.
Although she, I think, is actually from New Zealand. Shallow Grave is the debut feature film of director Danny Boyle of films like Trainspotting, 28 Days Later, Slumdog Millionaire, and Yesterday, the movie where the Beatles don't exist, and neither does Coca-Cola or cigarettes for some reason.
Wow.
It's a wild movie. Shallow Grave follows 3 friends and flatmates played by Carrie Fox, Ewan McGregor, and Christopher Eccleston, all very early on in their careers. Mm-hmm. Particularly Eccleston and McGregor go on to have massive careers and be household names for many households. But this is very early on in all of their careers. The lives of these characters get turned completely upside down after they find their mysterious new roommate dead of a drug overdose with a suitcase full of cash under his bed. So they deliberate a little bit, take several days to mull it over, and ultimately decide to cover up the guy's death, split the money between them, dismember his body. And this affects the 3 of them in really different ways, which is, I think, one of the most interesting things about all 3 of these movies that we've talked about. And particularly this one, they each, take really drastic action to be the one to come out on top. And they're, affected in drastically different ways, which is something I'm really excited to get into. So we open this movie with a very, I think, interesting sequence. First of all, their doormat at their apartment, in all caps, "Not today, thank you."
I like that.
Yeah.
Which I think is a great opening. Emilio, you and I spoke briefly last week before you hadn't seen it, but you had watched the trailer.
Yeah.
And you said, like, you asked me, like, are they just bad people? And now that you've seen the movie, and now that Julian, you've seen the movie, I want to pose that question to you. I mean, it's kind of a big question. I kind of put bad in quotations here, but at the beginning of the film, do you think they're quote unquote bad people? We see them interviewing these roommates, these potential roommates, and they're very mean to these people who are probably perfectly nice people just looking for a place to live, like we all do.
Yeah, I'm like wondering how attractive their apartment really is. I'm wondering like what the New York
massive
equivalent would be, like if this is like a penthouse overlooking Central Park.
Yeah.
To your point, you know, I think I was thinking a lot about politeness as it relates to these movies, because Fargo, I think it's a lot about niceness. It's a lot about presentation. And I feel like A Simple Plan is a movie that's really more about good and evil, like I alluded to before. And this movie, there is a little bit of a mob mentality that goes on, because I think maybe separately, the three of them are not maybe this cruel.
That was exactly what I was thinking.
But I do think that the movie makes a really strong point to refer to this cruelness as an outgrowth of friendship.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why is because the movie ends with them cackling over kicking somebody out on a loop. And I think is there to talk about how friendship is not necessarily something that brings out the best in you.
Yeah.
That it can actually be about bringing out the worst in you.
Yeah, that was my exact thought, is that they bring out the worst in each other. And I think we get an example of this right up top, which is we see the three of them, you know, interviewing these potential tenants. Then after a bit of time, we see just Juliet interview Hugo, the roommate that they actually do take on. She is much kinder to him than they are to any of the others.
She also kind of wants to bone him.
Yeah, it's like she maybe is attracted to him. He maybe is making like a good first impression. He's maybe a little sexier than any of the others.
Yeah.
But she is much kinder to him than they are to any of the others. And ultimately, when she vouches for him, like the other three aren't nearly as harsh on him when they bring him to dinner.
What I will say, though, is in that same sequence, she also puts him to the test.
That's true.
And she makes him go and push away what seems to be a male pursuer.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, one of the through lines of the film with Juliet's character, is that there is this sexuality and there's this maybe promise of fulfilling it with the people in her life.
Yeah, there's this sexual tension
over a lot of her relationships. And so she's leading with that already with this guy.
But this is also something that we see throughout the film.
Yes, totally.
Alex, Ewan McGregor's character, is constantly doing this for her.
Yeah.
He's always answering the phone and gets increasingly frustrated at these gentleman callers where he'll at some point just answer, "She's not home," hang up the phone.
It was interesting. I mean, I think that the movie kind of shows you that, yes, there is a friendship, in quotes, between them, but that it's also a strange and very strained dynamic.
Oh, definitely.
Between them. There is this promise of fulfilling some sort of sexual need that Juliet has over the two of them, over Alex and David. And eventually she cashes that in.
Yeah, she uses that to her advantage.
In a couple of situations, I think, but most notably, I think, with David. But I think also, and I don't know if this was intentional in any way, shape, or form, Ewan McGregor's character is named Alex.
Yes.
His name is Alex Law. It reminded me, he has a lot of energy of Alex from A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
Where it's very, he's the leader of these droogs. He's the guy who's always got, you know, like something funny to say. And he's got the next scheme in mind for them to sort of live out their debauchery.
Yeah, it justifies sort of that Alex DeLarge from A Clockwork Orange comparison too. Not that money is involved in the same way in A Clockwork Orange, but that sort of deviousness that he is entering every situation with. I think that's a very prominent detail of his character.
It's interesting too, because the dynamic that the film starts with is not the dynamic that the film ends with.
There is a total role reversal from the beginning to the end. And we've talked a little bit about Alex and a little bit about Juliet. So let's talk a little bit about David, which is Christopher Eccleston's character, who's certainly like the most straight-laced at the start of the film, but goes the most manic throughout. Yeah. And I think his character arc is really interesting. I mean, even towards the beginning, he's not directly described as boring, but his boss, he's an accountant, and his boss is saying something like, yeah, I mean, some people might say our work is boring, and that's why you're good at it. And that's sort of the moment that David decides, like, okay, let's take the money.
At that, it's while he's having a vision of Juliet doing his job while doing his job as well. So that adds that sort of sexual undertone to it.
David is very passive at the beginning of this film. He actually, other than the scene we see with them essentially interrogating their potential future roommates, other than that, he's almost always on his way out the door. Like, he doesn't really talk to them that much. They don't seem to have anything in common. But when David doesn't really want to take the money, Alex is like, well, then call the cops. And David won't even do that. Like, he doesn't want to actually take any action. And when they draw the straws on who's going to dismember the body, of course, it's David who draws the short straw. And he's like, I can't do it. I can't do it. And they're like, well, you got it.
But he does.
Too bad. So he does do it. And then, yes, at that point, that is the turning point for him. And then another, I think, turning point is when they're at the hospital fundraiser.
Cameron.
I
think so too. That's a big moment that really does shift. Yeah. Everything after that becomes about consequence for them.
Cameron's part of it. And then there's the guy, I forget the name, but one of Juliet's gentleman callers. He comes to the table and he asks her to dance. And David, I think, has said basically nothing in this scene at this point, but he turns to the guy and he's like, essentially, who the fuck are you?
Yeah.
If you want to talk to my girlfriend, you have to talk to me first. And I end up in a bin bag. It's a great moment. That's like him having now dismembered a body and smashed a man's teeth out, which, by the way, I watched this with subtitles, and during the teeth smashing, it said squishy thudding.
Oh my God, that's weird.
Very descriptive. So at this point, he's dismembered a body and hammered a man's teeth out, so he's unrecognizable. And now he can stand up for Juliet, and he's grown a backbone. And at this point, it really starts to snowball.
Totally, yeah. Sorry I jumped on your point, but that's where things really take a turn for David's character, obviously. But then also, I think from that moment on, the criminals, the two guys who are going after the suitcase, that's when they actually enter their lives. And so, that's kind of the last hurrah that they have of feeling carefree and not having consequence for their actions.
Yeah, because at this point, they haven't killed anybody. They did cover up a guy's death and do really terrible things to his corpse, but they haven't actually killed anyone at this point. It's, once these two guys find them, break into their apartment, that's when David actually commits murder for the first time.
Yeah. And of course, in this home invasion scenario, it is David who's the one who can, in quotes, take care of it. And I think you see a much fuller transformation with this character than you do with Hank in A Simple Plan. Because even while he has to do things that you'd think he would regret doing, you don't see his total persona change the way that you do with David. He goes from being this reserved accountant figure to someone who honestly makes me think quite a bit of Norman Bates, and maybe mostly just because he's hiding in this attic looking through peepholes.
I love the shot after he's drilled the holes in the floor of the attic, and you've got the light streaming into that.
Me
it's
too.
Such a good shot.
It feels like something very evocative of something like almost like silent movie like, I really love, and this is just sort of a film technique thing that I think is just done very well. You see the pursuers basically cross-cut very creatively, I think, with things that David and Juliet and Alex are going through. You know, when they're first wrapping up the body, David is like, guys, I have to ask this question. It goes right to these two guys threatening another guy to give them information. It's literally cut from like, guys, you need to ask a question to, I don't have an answer to that. Yeah. You know, but and then
this
later,
is like the film telling us like these guys are
closer.
Coming. This is going to come together.
And there's another one too that I thought was really creative, which was, I don't know where they get that weird baby doll. That just is kind of just another strange image. But there's a moment where it looks like it's on a step or something, and it rattles and it falls, and it's literally match cut perfectly to the pursuers dropping a rock onto the car that they find. And so there's a lot happening. Also, too, I think Alex is on the ground at the dance, and he's looking up, and then you see the person looking up from whatever freezer they're in.
The freezer. The freezer.
Horrible.
I feel like I could feel that of like too. When they bring him out to like interrogate him a little more, and then they put him back, and he's just like begging.
Yeah. It's horrible. It's really, I don't know. Sometimes scenes like that, like, I don't know. Anyway, but I love how that happens because it's cut really creatively, I think, to sort of marry these scenes together and to marry the tension that is just going to continue to mount as these two sets of characters are going to eventually collide. This is really, really cool.
And then, you know, to speak more about the kind of cross-cutting between the characters, I think it's quite interesting how you see them at their jobs too. You know, they really make it very apparent that David is an accountant and Juliet works in a hospital. But then you kind of don't really know what Alex does until maybe the beginning of the film's third act, which is you find out that he is a journalist. Yeah,
he says something when they find Hugo's body that I think only if maybe you've seen this before and you know that he's a reporter. He says, "It's not often I find a story in my own flat."
Right, you're right.
I love the plot point of him getting sent to cover the murders. I love that addition.
I also like the reveal. That it comes from the guy and he's just like talking about it and he's like, I haven't heard it. And he's like, well,
you're the one to report it.
Or he's like, I would be surprised if you had heard of it. Because
I'm
like,
sending you out there.
Yeah, pretty nice touch, I think, as well. Because by that point in the movie, Alex is sort of turned into we talked about role reversal. He's really kind of flipped. And he's now sort of the passive kind of timid one who's starting to really, really worry about the consequences, really worry about David's burgeoning violent tendencies.
And once Juliet and David, or like Juliet essentially seduces David to protect herself, and that leaves Alex out. He knows that I think is almost hoping for them to just run off with the money so he can just be done and be away from them and be safe again, because David looming above them with holes drilled in their ceiling is not good for his mental health.
Of course not. Yeah.
And in an interesting detail, I mean, I think the scene when he starts to see those holes being drilled, Alex he's sitting on the couch, and what he's watching is the movie The Wicker Man, which I don't know if either of you have seen before. But there is, like the scene that he's watching is this character being brought up to this sort of Burning Man-like mound to be sacrificed. And I think maybe Alex is starting to worry about his own future and see the details in there.
Because earlier in the film, he's watching the game show How to Lose a Million. Which is funny.
Yeah.
Because they have all this money. It's much more lighthearted. And so I think, this contrast to what he ends up watching later reflects his mental state.
Yeah.
If we're trying to think about these three movies and the kind of what they're kind of trying to say about their characters, and I could be oversimplifying here, but that Fargo seems to be creating a world where a lot of violence and a lot of good can coexist. And that ultimately it's important for us to focus on the good of people. And a simple plan is a little bit more, has a very kind of bleak feeling.
Yeah.
Money corrupts good.
Yeah.
And I feel like this movie is a little bit more like money just reveals the true nature of people and in some ways corrupts, but really just brings out all of the really bad qualities in a way that in some respects the friendship angle does too.
Exactly. In a way, we see that they all could be capable of doing this.
Yeah. And if I may jump to the very ending of the movie, there are revelations in those last few moments that are rather consequential in our understandings of all the characters. I think probably to the greatest degree with Juliet. She lets Alex and David get into a bloody fight with each other. And while Alex is lying on the ground with a knife holding him to the ground.
Through his shoulder.
So he isn't dead, but he's stabbed. While that happens, she mortally wounds David and then runs off with what she thinks is the money.
And drives the knife deeper into his shoulder.
Yes.
He wasn't fully pinned. I mean, he was partially pinned, but probably could have gotten up. But she drives it further through and just pins him completely to the floor.
And she laughs about it. She gives him a kind of a smirk on the way out.
Yeah. But then what she doesn't realize is that Alex has anticipated this move and replaced all of the money with newspaper clippings. And she opens up the briefcase with the money the next day and finds that out. And then Alex, as the police department, files into the apartment and starts to take notes on the scene. He just starts laughing because he knows where the...
Yeah, and he's hidden the money under his floorboards, which is funny because in Trainspotting, which you alluded to, Ewan McGregor's character is also the one that ends up with the money. So back-to-back boils where McGregor ends up with the money.
Yeah. He ends up out on top. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And now that we've spoken about the ending a little bit, I wanted to ask what both of your interpretations were of the scene where after Juliet has fled and Alex's eyes open and he's got the camera in his face and he's got the detective peering down at him. When this film was originally released, I think it was a little bit different, and people had interpreted Alex being dead at this point. And some people continue to interpret him being dead. So I wanted to see what your thoughts were on that.
I think I read that Danny Boyle actually reshot something, or
he reshot this ending. He talks about it on the commentary.
Yeah.
And because he said, no, Alex is not meant to be dead.
Right. It kind of makes it seem like there needs to be a winner.
Yeah.
I don't know how I totally feel about it, but in this moment, I feel fine with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But how much of a winner is Alex really? I mean, he's been stabbed in the shoulder after all.
Right. But he's also gotten something over on these people.
Yeah.
Alex's character is capable of just feeling very selfish in that moment.
Yeah. And the beginning and ending monologues that Eccleston's character does, the voiceover, even though I guess he's presumed dead at this point, that's also a monologue kind of about friendship and what it does to you.
And also, I think that at the very beginning of the movie, I would have to watch it again to remember the exact line, but David in voiceover alludes to, everything could have been so much simpler.
Yeah.
That it all
could have been a simple plan.
It all started out as a simple, not even plan, just simplicity. That his descent into the darker sides of himself maybe is just this very drawn out need for simplicity that he allows to go unrestrained at a certain point. And on the level of format and of genre, the image of him that you see at the beginning and a few times throughout that you later find out is his body in a morgue. That's a very noirish thing to do, to foretell the end at the beginning. I think the earliest movie I'm aware of doing that is Double Indemnity. I think of that as kind of the double indemnity maneuver.
To tie this slightly into Fargo, and in some respects, is I watching this movie, I could not help but think of Blood Simple. It even ends kind of in this using non-diegetic music that is meant to sort of clash with what you're seeing.
Yeah.
You know, it ends in this very similar sort of dark humor note of like, well, ain't that just life?
Yeah. I believe that he had like himself and the three actors living together for a week during production and just like hang out and watch movies. And one of the movies they watched was Blood Simple because he's just like a huge fan of that film.
You know, I might not at first think to compare Blood Simple and Shallow Grave on the surface level, but yeah, like in hindsight, I can definitely see that too, especially in the darkly comedic touches. We're, you know, on that broader topic of dark comedy, we talked about how Fargo kind of cuts through this facade of niceness in Minnesota and North Dakota specifically. And that it's worth talking about that on the other side of the pond too. There is this sense in a lot of British humor, and Danny Boyle is a British director, that there's maybe you're not cutting through niceness, but you're cutting through the so-called stiff upper lip of British society, that it's a very repressed society. It's not honest about its feelings.
We never really in Fargo know what Jerry's deal is. We like it's alluded to some. We know he owns, he owes a lot of money. He took out some sort of sketchy loan. We know that he feels very desperate. He feels like he needs the money. And in A Simple Plan, these people are really down on their luck. At least with Jacob and Lou, we feel their desperation. In Shallow Grave, we don't necessarily feel that. They all have like stable professional jobs. Like they're all doing just fine. I mean, clearly anybody would want millions of dollars if you could just have it drop in your bank account, but they don't necessarily need the money. They're not about to be evicted or anything.
Which I think also ties back to the fact that I think these people at their core, I think are just allowed to be more selfish in this movie.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that selfishness is a trait that we are asked to confront and make opinions about. These are not maybe the nicest or most caring people. Yeah. And are they still given the latitude to feel sympathy over when things start to go really wrong? Yeah, so for me, this is an 8. This is a movie I definitely would love to come back to. I'm also kind of a sucker for first movies.
It's such a good debut. It's interesting that the other directors we talked about, they make these movies later than Shallow Grave, but they've had longer careers. Like they are already established directors. Whereas this movie being a debut is really impressive to me. And you see a lot in this movie that I think Danny Boyle refines more in Trainspotting.
Yeah.
Totally.
And interestingly, I think Danny Boyle is around the same age as both the Coen brothers and Sam Raimi. So the debut, like while it is later in his life, he was probably taking in at least, you know, for sure the Coen brothers. Well, I guess I'm curious what keeps the movie short of being a 10 for you.
So I don't know totally why I wouldn't give it a 10. I feel like I gotta really love a movie and have to have a real relationship with it before I give it a 10. I could totally see this movie going up in time. I did really enjoy it. I did enjoy a lot of aspects of it. I think it's a pretty rich text too, so I think there's a lot to go back to. I just feel like 8 feels right to me right now.
Yeah. And off of that, I would say I'd give it a 9 personally. And what keeps it short of a perfect score for me is that I don't necessarily see any flaw in the making of the movie. Shallow Grave is a very finely done neo-noir. I think it really has all of the things that a movie like that needs, and it's very distinct, original, unique in a lot of ways. But I think that Trainspotting reaches a little further. I haven't seen a lot of Danny Boyle's other movies, which is definitely something I should get on. But I feel like, you know, the reach of a film like Trainspotting is just a little bit greater. So I think that Shallow Grave is like a solidly good example of something maybe a little bit less ambitious. So that's my reason for giving it a 9 out of 10. But, you know, all of that said, it's, you know, a really solid movie. I think it's very funny. I think it's paced very well. I think it's very well acted too.
Great performances in this. And like I said early on, that this is early in everyone's career, not just Danny Boyle's, but the actors as well. I was curious on, like, obviously we all know Ewan McGregor. He's in a million things, including the Star Wars verse. But Christopher Eccleston, I feel like I'm deeply familiar with because I was like a Doctor Who fan in college. And then like recently watched The Leftovers, which he is fantastic in. And I was curious as to what your relationships are with Christopher Eccleston specifically.
Zero.
I've
not watched Leftovers, and I'm not a Doctor Who fan. That's not to say I look down at it at all.
I do not remain a Doctor Who fan, but a decade ago.
I just never made time for it. Also, the scope of that show was very intimidating to me.
Yeah.
I don't dislike the show now. I kind of just dropped off with it.
Yeah.
It was hard for me to really keep up. But Doctor Who began with David Tennant for me.
Yeah.
But the one other thing that I also know Eccleston from, which is also a Danny Boyle movie, is
28 Days Later.
28 Days Later.
He's great in that.
Without spoiling anything, like he is really a double-sided character. And I knew what he looked like from Doctor Who, even in spite of not having seen it, but I didn't necessarily recognize him right away.
Because he's so pretty in this, like particularly in that beginning and ending shot. He's very like clean. Yeah. He has this sharp jaw. He gets a little like rougher as he ages.
Yeah. And then just to quickly, before we wrap up, to speak a little more about acting. I mean, I've been a Ewan McGregor fan for many, many years because I grew up a Star Wars fan. But it's just so wild to consider that both Shallow Grave and Trainspotting are just a few years before he played Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars prequels. And they're so radically different roles that he really plays these, in Shallow Grave and Trainspotting, these much more sort of unhinged characters than Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is like this, this symbol of nobility almost in the Star Wars
sage,
in the Star Wars universe, and that it really speaks to his range as an actor.
And then he does Moulin Rouge not long after that.
Yeah,
so it's like he just has this run of, I mean, it's like 6 or 7 years or something. Like it's a very short period of time where he's got Shallow Grave and Trainspotting and starts Star Wars and does Moulin Rouge, like all in like a span of I think 7 years, and that's just crazy. And I never rated Shallow Grave. I think I'm also going to go 9. I was going to go 8.5, but I really like this movie. I watched it for the first time last year, and then I rewatched it in the last week, and I'm like, man, I love this. But I don't know why I wouldn't give it a 10, but I think, Julian, what you were alluding to, I just think Danny Boyle is really able to bring that little, like, little something extra to Trainspotting, that there was like maybe that like je ne sais pas, like missing.
Yeah, and I might give Trainspotting a 10.
Yeah.
It's been many years since I watched that. I would need to see it again, but...
Same here. I think it's been 20 years almost since I've seen that movie.
And interestingly, I guess maybe this is a good closing point, that that Danny Boyle, like he started off his career with these two dark comedies, Shallow Grave and Trainspotting, but throughout the rest of his career, you kind of don't see anything else, unless, I'm forgetting something. You don't see much else that really resembles that.
Trainspotting 2.
That's a good point.
T2 Trainspotting, actually.
Which I have not seen yet.
It's great. I think I'm the one that told you about this.
You did.
And you said there's a Trainspotting 2.
I know. I said it as there's a Trainspotting 2. I was very confused. I was like, wait, what?
But actually, it is very good. And I think that taking 20 years between this is the way to go.
Yeah.
But I do recommend T2 Trainspotting.
Cool.
Very cool, guys.
Yeah.
This is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's a good place to wrap up.
And I'm sure we'll probably do this some other time soon.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. A lot of fun.
All right.
Thank you. All right.